Okay, day 75, Friday. We made it through another week of everyday practice. So if this is your first time joining, my name is Andrew Loren, and this is a series I'm doing where I'm tracking my everyday art practice and my growth as an artist. Right now we're in the middle of a series that we're kind of calling Anatomy Month, which means for the entire month of January, we're studying different aspects of anatomy. So we started by looking at the front of the torso, then Friday this week is now finishing up the back of the torso, and then next week we'll do legs, and then finally finish with arms. So today's like the last official day of studying back. I have to admit that the back is what was way more complex than I had originally imagined. So this is not my first time studying the back anatomy. I've done it actually a couple times before, I would say, in the past. But this week was the first time that I was really trying to intensely study it and understand a lot of different aspects about the different muscles that are on the back. So this is the first time that I really paid attention to the, let's say, the connection and the origin of each muscle, and really tried to pay attention to like the overlaps of different muscles, and even do, look at many different reference images and do a lot of different tracings. So that's actually something that I didn't really cover on this channel that much. Maybe I should cover actually for future anatomy drawings, but I've actually been doing a lot of anatomy tracings on my own. I think they're super helpful. And if you haven't seen those before, you can look up like Proco anatomy tracing and kind of get an idea of how those, like how to best do those. But the idea is super simple. You take an image and then you draw over it and just try and kind of draw the muscles as best as you can, and then when you get stuck, you try and ideally like go to some kind of reference or something like that. But the whole idea is basically take a figure and then start to subtract away and try and understand where the muscle groups are and how they're connecting together based on that kind of final image. And you can do it with any kind of reference. You can do it with the references that I post. So for example, I'm using today, I'll talk about the reference a little in a minute, but you can see, references that are down below. I have different links to an amazing website called characterdesigns.com that has like some really awesome references. But you could even just do it while you're watching TV. Just pause, any moment where you have some kind of anatomy exposed. Could be arm, or maybe, maybe there's a scene where there's more leg, full body, or something like that. Or even like a magazine or something, and flipping through a magazine and, okay, here's an example where I can kind of try and trace and understand better the anatomy. But these are super helpful. So I did a lot of these actually this month. So maybe we'll talk about it actually. We should talk about it in the either leg or arm. We'll talk about doing some anatomy tracings. Okay, but for today's exercise, so what I've done this week is I did a few drawings that were specifically from like anatomy studies. So this was a diagram of the human body, the flayed human body, meaning no skin, and it has the muscles exposed of the back. And I started with that. And I did both a rear view and a profile view of the human torso. To get a sense of the back muscles, both from the back, from behind, and then from the side. Then I did 3 different studies that were from a reference where I was trying to start with the skeleton and then build up the muscles from there. And that was the previous 2. So this one, I decided to do a master study, but I kind of did it in a bit of a weird way. And so you'll notice that the reference is actually not right now on the screen. And the reason for that is that I'm not sure I can actually share this reference. So I actually found someone who had taken the Proco premium course and had done one of the exercises and then posted them online. And so if you look in the link below, it's the first link. You can see exactly the reference that I'm using. And so what you have is actually 3 things. It's pretty awesome for 2 different figures. But for this one that we're focusing on today, the male back, we have the actual reference image, which is what I started with drawing from. Then you have down below a small anatomy tracing, so someone traced over that exact image, trying to place in the anatomy. And then the third thing you have is a rendering that you can kind of, in theory, like do a master copy of. Now, this is student level work, so the master copy, like if it's better than what you're working on now, it can be worth doing the master copy, but it's also worth noting that, there's some decisions that I saw that were made that personally I wouldn't make, so kind of like take the master study aspect with a grain of salt. Not that they're not beautiful studies, by the way, really nicely done studies, so kudos to the artist, but it's different than copying Proco himself or copying Jeff Watts is all I'm trying to say. And so to summarize, the way to practice this, the way that I did this is You first look at the reference image and get as far as you can with tracing out anatomy, drawing anatomy, building it from the ground up, without looking at anything else, without looking at the tracing, without looking at the study, it's the other study that was done. Then, when you kind of get stuck a little bit, you're allowed to go to the anatomy tracing, and then you can start to pull in some aspects from the anatomy tracing into your drawing. And then the last thing that you do is, if you get stuck there, then you can go to look at the actual study that was done. And by doing this, you're really training your mind to get as far as you can without any crutch, and then you have something that can kind of help you get over that barrier. Like, ideally, you're not looking at every time you get stuck, it's just one quick little thing, like, this is kind of a little bit of a weird angle, how is this piece of the anatomy attached in here, like, what exactly is this shadow shape that I'm seeing? And then okay, now I see, this is actually the corner of the trapezius, which means that this actually comes down, okay, now I see it, now I understand it better. That's like the ideal kind of mentality that you want to have as you're doing one of these studies. And for me, these are one of the best ways to grow. Like, I actually would love to do a series, which might come in the future, where we take a bunch of reference photos and just try and like draw it, like, as best we can, a bunch of master copies and tracings, anatomy tracings, and then create like a library of these things. Because to me, this is like one of the best ways to practice. You know, you really learn so much by pushing yourself as far as you can go, and then if you get stuck, you have something to kind of help you through. There's actually this is like a great analogy for weightlifting. I mean, even if you haven't just seen weightlifting in like TVs and movies, you know, like the idea of the spotter, right? Someone is lifting, and then eventually they get stuck, I can't get it, and then the spotter comes in, helps them, and then they finish, take a break, and then come back and go and do it again, right? And it's the exact same way. You can treat these other drawings as kind of like spotters, like kind of like references. So I got cut off a little bit there, but I was actually about to say, now we'll transition into the time lapse, and I'll just start to do the voiceover. So in total, this drawing took about 45 minutes to an hour. I would say I spent the first 30 minutes of it just blocking in all of the different anatomy shapes. And it wasn't probably until about minute 25 or so that I first looked at the anatomy tracing that's present in the reference. As I said, I really think that the value in doing this kind of work is to go as far as you can, really push yourself all the way until you have to look at the references before you actually do that. In fact, what I'm doing at this point is cleaning up a little bit of the anatomy based on differences in the anatomy tracing and what I had here. And I should also say that the anatomy tracing is kind of one example of the solution set to this drawing, but it doesn't represent the only solution. So there was actually areas of the anatomy drawing, the trace over, that I didn't quite agree with, and I felt like what I had put down was a little more accurate. In your own practice, you might find the same, or you might find yourself relying heavily on the anatomy tracing. I think either way, as long as you're learning more and internalizing more about the anatomy and how it creates the different shadow shapes and is present on the figure, as long as you're improving your knowledge, your study is moving in the right direction. At this point, I'm actually focused a little bit more on the drawing itself, and I'm actually going back in and redefining some of the rhythm lines. I've said this before in other drawings, but I often find that whenever I kind of get stuck or I want to progress a little bit further in the drawing, it really helps me to go back through and redefine rhythms. So that's things like the vertical center line that's going down the back. Or I also found this really nice rhythm that goes across the back. So from the deltoid on the left side, and it kind of arches up and arrives to the deltoids on the right side. So now that I'm comfortable more or less with where everything is, I'll actually go in now and start to darken up and create some of those more quote-unquote final lines. And this also includes blocking in the shadow shape. So I haven't talked about it in several videos, but if you go back to around day 30, where I was doing a lot of portrait drawing, I talk a lot about my process. And my process is something that I follow in more or less every drawing and even painting that I do. And it's a 6-step process where I start first with a 2D structure of the drawing, then I move to the 3D structure of the drawing, and then I'll block out all of the shadow shapes, so kind of outline them or lasso them like I'm doing right here. Then I'll finally mass in the shadows, which will come in a little bit later, but that's kind of adding that first layer of tone. Then after that stage, I'll finally address the halftones, and then lastly, I'll clean up any edge work. This lassoing technique was also stolen a little bit from Jeffrey Watts, and also Proko implements some of the same kind of strategy. I find it gives some really great depth to the figure when you kind of lasso out these shadow shapes with thin, sharp lines. So now it's time to begin blocking in the shadow shapes, which is really just filling in all of the shadow shapes that I previously outlined. At this stage, I'm actually quite happy with the drawing, and as an anatomy study, I could actually call it finished. And I was kind of taking some time here to meditate and decide if I actually wanted to continue with the drawing or just leave it as it is. In the end, I decided to push it a little bit further and start to work on some of the halftones that are found in between the shadow area and the light area. For the halftones, I actually referenced the drawing in the study and the reference image quite a bit. I actually think that the value work that was done by that other artist is really great, so I tried to copy some of the elements that I liked. And I finished this drawing just by tightening up some of the value work and sharpening some of the lines. And that's it for day 75. I will see you again on Monday, and I hope that this motivated you to draw today.